everyone. Welcome to the Edge Portal. Tonight, Larry has a roundtable discussion. Welcome to the broadcast, Larry.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, and I do really welcome everyone that showed up tonight, and as a matter of fact, anybody that shows up, to listen later. I think we're going to have an interesting talk. Is my sound okay, Dorothy?
Now it is. For a minute there, you weren't there. You scared me.
All right. I welcome everybody to the show, and we've got a really good roundtable tonight. And with me tonight, and I'll introduce them all in a few minutes, I wanted to give Richard a few minutes first, and then we'd get into introductions and let everybody have their say, so to speak. But tonight's going to be an interesting night because Richard Shaw has a new film out, and I've read about it. It says Richard Shaw's film, actually. And the report is it's a DVD. It's a new DVD. I believe it's going to be streaming soon, too. And, Richard, if you would, go ahead and just share just a little bit about what the Torah Codes Into Darkness is and your trip to Israel and how people can obtain this and if you're going to have streaming later, too.
Well, thank you, Larry. Thanks for having me on this evening. I really appreciate it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Richard, go ahead if you
I can hear you.
I think we're having a few audio problems, but go ahead and just explain what your new DVD is about.
Sure. I said thanks for having me on this evening. Basically, I've been interested in the Bible codes for a long time, and it wasn't until the first of last year that funding became available to actually do this film. We've been wanting to do it for a long time, but I didn't want to do it until I could do it right. And so by the time we did our pre-production and got ready to go, war broke out in Israel. But we still had our flights booked, so everyone that had planned to come on this trip to help with the production still wanted to go. So we went. And it was an amazing trip. And right about the time we got there, they had a final ceasefire with Hamas, and we basically could go wherever we wanted to go. And Dan Gordon flew over to meet with us. Dan is a well-known screenplay writer, a good friend of mine. Also, he's a SARL volunteer. He's a captain in the IDF Reserves. And so he also speaks Hebrew and can read my Torah code tables, which is really helpful. Dan has done a number of movies that probably a lot of people have seen. He wrote movies like Passenger 57, The Hurricane with Denzel Washington. Just a whole slew of films. Wyatt Earp. It just goes on. And he's a brilliant guy. And the first film that I ever saw of his was many years ago, and it was called The Assignment. And it didn't get a lot of attention because the company that put it out in those days, I believe the name of the distribution company, the studio, was Triumph Films. And Triumph went out of business 30 days after the movie came out. But it was a big film. It had big stars in it, like Donald Sutherland was in it, Ben Kingsley, Aidan Quinn, and it was basically a movie about the jackal. And a lot of it in the film took place in Israel. And when I first saw the film, I'm going, someone who wrote this had an intimate knowledge of Israel's security operations. I just couldn't believe what an intelligent film it was. Come to find out, it's my friend Dan Gordon that wrote it. So Dan knew some guys and got me into the Tel Naf Air Force Base on the Gaza border, where I met Mike Huckabee, happened to be there because Fox News was interviewing him, so I got to meet Mike. I also got to meet some really incredible intellectual people like Colonel Richard Kemp, who was at one time the commander for the UK in Afghanistan, and knew all about Hezbollah and Hamas and ISIS and the whole deal from the inside out, and is very much a supporter of Israel, and like me is kind of baffled at why the news media has taken such a strange stance against Israel when Israel is the recipient of the attacks. So this was a Torah Code film, and most of these guys couldn't understand why I was there doing a film about the Torah Codes when Israel was in a state of war. But what was interesting was that all of the rabbis and professors who have been the basically the discoverers and the primary researchers of the Torah Code are all there in Jerusalem, save Robert Herlick, who is in New York City, who also writes code to search the Torah. But this is like the world experts that we were talking to, and they were backing up the events that was currently going on in Israel in the Torah Codes. Like Dan would tell me, yeah, there's been 4,000 missiles that have been shot by Hamas in the 2014 summer Hamas war. And Rabbi Glazerson comes up with a table that says thousands of missiles, and up at the top of the page it says 4. So it's like the whole thing is in the Torah Code table, and I sent you some of those, Larry, if you want to put them up on your site. You maybe already have, and I just haven't seen it yet.
No, I actually got them. I've been having problems with my computer, and I'm unable to even view them. They came in the email, but I'm not able to, so I apologize for that. And
that's okay. This is like they're all in the film. And so what I decided to do after the film was completed, finished it in December, and it wasn't mastered until January. So it's a 2015 release. It's mastered at Deluxe Labs in Burbank, out here in California. And I decided to release it on Blu-ray in high definition because these Torah Code tables are so complex that I wanted people to be able to see them in HD clearly. But yet, in case someone didn't have a Blu-ray player, I also wanted them to be able to see the film. So included in the box with the Blu-ray DVD is a standard depth DVD. So no matter what you got, you can play this film.
That's great.
Will that play in all regions of the planet?
Yes, I did not put region codes in it. I didn't do anything like that to prevent anybody in any country from watching it.
Okay, thanks.
Because that's something that mostly the studios do when they're trying to secure territories. And in my case, I just wanted the knowledge to be out there.
Well, that is great. And it was interesting because I was aware, Richard, of your trip when you was going to Israel, and things were really looking a little rough about that time, and then you got over there. And it's kind of like the storm had blown over a little and allowed you to get around and do some things. But as you said, everything was still on edge. I think I believe when you went into Jerusalem, wasn't it that way?
Well, yeah. There's a town in East Jerusalem that's built up on a hillside, and it's called Silwan, Silwan. It's a town that's inhabited by both Arabs and Jews. There are little apartments that are kind of built on the edge of cliffs, kind of sticking out into the air. And I'd never been over there, but I'd seen it because if you go to Israel on a tour and you happen to visit the Mount of Olives and you're looking back at the Old City, then Silwan, if your back is to the Mount of Olives and you're facing the Old City, Silwan would be to your left, just a couple miles up the road. And it was such a wild-looking little town, I thought, what is this place? It's really interesting looking, and it looked like something from Morocco or something out of a Bourne Identity movie. So our driver was an Arab guy, taxi driver, who I really liked a lot. His name was Sadr, S-A-D-R. And I said, take us up into Silwan. Is it dangerous there? And he said, it's not too bad. And we talked about it. Well, so we drive up there. I said, I want to go way up there in some of the grungy parts where I can really film it and show people a different kind of side of town. I don't want this to look like a travel log. I want it to look like what's really going on in Israel. And so he drove us up there, and we noodled our way up higher and higher. And if someone happens to come down the same road that you're going up, you have to pull way off to the right and hug the wall and let the other cars squeeze by. And sometimes little Arab kids would come out of their houses and direct traffic for you. And there'd be cats and dogs running around. It's just awesome. There's graffiti all over the place. And so we get up there a little further, and this is actually in the trailer for the movie. The Silwan police stepped out in front of our car, all these guys with machine guns over their shoulders, and basically stopped us and spoke Arabic to my driver, and I'm just kind of sitting there smiling because they didn't know I was filming all of this. And they turned us around, and I said, and just as they were talking to our driver, Sadr, I noticed that where we were was kind of a fork in the road. The right side went up the hill even further, and the left side went down, but it got almost impassable on the left side. So I don't think we could have driven Sadr's Mercedes down in that area. We would probably run into a rut or something. But there was a group of soldiers trotting down the hill distance away, a couple blocks. I could see them through the windshield, all with riot shields in front of them. So I thought, that's not good. Something's going on up there. And, you've seen these shields that are slightly curved and they're plexiglass. You can see through them. That's what they were all carrying.
Sure.
And come to find out, there were some Palestinians up there that were stoning people, stoning cars and throwing rocks at people and, trying to hurt people. So we turned around and left rather than to get involved with that. Didn't want Sadr's car to come back all dented up. And then after I got home, a couple of weeks later, a Palestinian guy ran over a Jewish infant and killed it. And then there was a couple other things that happened, small acts of terror and violence that occurred in that same town right after we shot that little clip that's actually in the film. So there indeed was tensions brewing, and I think the Hamas war kind of opened that wound back up again. Every time things start going smoothly, somebody shoots a missile over into Israel, and then it all starts up again, which is happening now from Lebanon with Hezbollah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Richard, let me ask you, before we get too far into this, one thing I forgot to do was, I've got Penlight up, and I probably should have put L.A. Marzulli's, LAMarzulli.net up too, because would you explain to people how they can get their hands on a hard copy, or, if you're going to stream later, and just tell people how to obtain this DVD, because I think it's just an awesome thing. I've seen the trailers, and I know some of the data, and I think it's good.
Well, sure. All you have to do is go to our website, endtodarkness.com. End, like the end of something. This is the end. endtodarkness.com.
Okay.
That's one of the main themes of the Torah Code film. And if you want, I can explain where that phrase came from and why we're calling the movie Into Darkness.
Yeah, why don't you do that? And because that's one thing that stuck out at me was Torah Codes and then Into Darkness, and that's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, thanks for putting my Pinlight web address up on the blog page. I see that up there. Into Darkness should probably be up there too, and I see Stan Deyo's there. What you can do, if you go to Into Darkness, you can see the trailer, you can pop it out full screen and look at it, and you can order the DVD. And it may take a bit of time to get one to you because we're remastering it. It should be remastered by next week, and then we should have shipping copies, I would say, within the next 10 days. So that there'll be a slight delay getting this next batch out.
Okay.
Into darkness was a phrase that came out of an idea initially in a book that was written by Professor Haralick, Rabbi Glazerson, and Professor Rips. This book was, the way I understand it from the way Rabbi Glazerson told me, they were there's a story behind the whole Into Darkness thing, and I thought it was a great name for the film, and so Glazerson and I named it that together. And
well, let me interrupt you real quick because I want to ask you this question. I'm sitting here looking at a book by Glazerson, Gallus, Haralick, and Wolf called Light Out of Darkness. Is that the book?
Well, the one I think that where they got this idea for the name was in one of their big books. It's a big book that they put together, did together, and it's called Torah Codes, Glimpse into the Infinite.
Oh, I've got that. That's Rips is in that one too, I believe.
Yeah, Rips and Haralick and Glazerson did that book jointly.
That's a good book.
But here's the story behind Into Darkness. People wonder how Professor Rips, who's widely considered to be the discoverer of the Torah Codes, he's actually not. But he was the guy that actually spearheaded the development of the Torah Codes so that what we have today, he coordinated the development in the computer software that allows us to search the Torah today. And it was his guidance that I credit him for making that part of it possible. Because he worked with a team at the time, two other men that were computer programmers and really great mathematicians, one by the name of Doran Whitston, and the other one was Yoav Rosenberg. And Professor Rips and the other two men developed a software that got us started looking at the codes. And this started because Rips was introduced to a man named Rabbi Yaniv back in 1976. And so what happened was Rabbi Yaniv was doing some experiments using a very primitive computer and trying to search part of the Torah in his computer, and showed what he was doing to Professor Rips. And it switched a light bulb on for Rips. He goes, wow, this is really cool. And he remembered Weissmandl's work in the 50s, who's a very famous mathematician, that really Michael Weissmandl is considered the discoverer of the way that we search the codes today. Equidistant letter sequencing, or ELS, is what it's called. And so Rabbi Yaniv gave Professor Rips Weissmandl's book of what the skip code was. And, of course, Weissmandl was the guy that discovered the word Torah in the book of Genesis, skipping every 50 letters. And then he said, oh, well, that's interesting. I wonder if it would happen in the book of Exodus. So he tried the same skip, counting with his finger in the book of Exodus, and it said Torah. So there are two books that said it did the same thing twice. Now, that's a little beyond just coincidence, but maybe it says that in the book of Leviticus, and it didn't work. So he thought, well, maybe, the Jews have this real affinity for numbers, and the number 8 to Jews that are into numerology, 8 stands for the union of God and man, because it has two little circles, one's on top and one's on the bottom, and it's like God and man. So he used an 8-character skip in the book of Leviticus, and it spelled out the word Hashem, which in Hebrew is the God of no name. And then he went back to try the 50-letter skip again in the book of Numbers, and it spelled Torah, but it spelled Torah backwards. And then in Deuteronomy, he tried it again, and it didn't work. He goes, oh, right, the 50 is like the perfect number, and Moses wrote the book of Deuteronomy, so he doesn't get the 50 number. So he tried a 49-letter skip in Deuteronomy, and it spelled Torah. Isn't that crazy? Huh.
Wow.
So get the graphic idea here. Torah, God in the middle, mirror image Torah, and that was found all by counting with his finger. Huh. So he found other things. I wish I had a list of his discoveries, because I know he discovered a lot of other things. I've never been able to find a list that definitively tells me what he actually did figure out. But he also had some interns that helped him in just counting and doing the thing. But it's very, I mean, you wouldn't know how many letters to skip. You just have to guess. And he would be finding things kind of arbitrarily at random. But nevertheless, that intrigued Professor Ripp. So you have to go back now to 1976 and realize what kind of computers were available back then. It was basically the Apple II. But in those days, it was like flickering Courier font on a black screen. It's like green letters on a... I mean, you remember those days, the way computers used to be. The DOS, the disk operating system, it really, of course, Apple had their own OS, which was a little more advanced, actually. So
hey, Richard,
I asked Professor Ripp.
I have a question for you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you made me think about something. This is Daniel. I know your friends in Jerusalem and Israel have an answer for this, but what do they say, if anything, is significant that they have discovered the Torah code at the time that we have discovered it, and that it's actually functional, that you could actually look things up now in the Torah code? What are they saying about the timing of that whole thing?
I'm getting to that. I just thought it would be interesting for people to know, because we're going back to 1976, and people will go, well, there were no Hebrew fonts on the computers in 1976, so how could they have possibly looked up Torah codes? Well, what I'm trying to do here briefly is explain how they did it. Basically, the computers didn't have any memory much at all in those days, so you couldn't even put the entire Torah in the computer back then. So what they did, they gave each of the Hebrew characters a number and fed that into the computer, and they might, it was a big achievement just to get the whole book of Genesis in the computer and start looking. And it was really the book of Genesis is where they really started finding the first really interesting code. But you're right, there's a scripture in Daniel, that talks about knowledge shall be increased, and shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Well, how do you seal a book that everybody's already reading? What does that mean? To me, it means that the only way you could do that would be to encrypt the data that lies inside of that book in some way, that the only way that you could decrypt it would be at the time of the end, which is like now.
Guys, I suspect also that the coding, the encryption, would also be something that just the non-Hebrew might not be able to understand. It might use Hebrew idioms and references to culture that unless you were Hebrew you wouldn't know, so it can further protect the data.
Yeah, I agree, Stan. That's one reason why Rabbi Glazerson, in my opinion, is so valuable in this study of the Torah Codes, because that's his expressed interest, is ancient Hebrew.
And ancient Hebrew does have different meanings to some of the modern Hebrew.
It does. And yet, some of the things that we find in the Torah Codes are pulled out of today's Hebrew newspaper. Like if you have, you wonder how the word airplane is spelled. Well, you look on the headlines of the Hebrew newspaper and you put it in the Torah Codes that way, because that's the approved Hebrew spelling of it. And sure enough, the word airplane comes up in the Torah Codes. So it's really fascinating.
Yep.
Wow. Let me go ahead and introduce everybody, because I can tell already there's some people jumping at the bit, and it sounds like some great discussion points coming up. of course, we got Richard Shaw that's talking about his new DVD coming out, Torah Codes, Into Darkness, and then we've got Stan Deyo. And Stan, I really, really do thank you for showing up and chatting with us and giving your input. If I tried to explain to people who you are, we would spend most of the show probably talking about you, so I won't do that. A lot of people already know you. And we've got Richard Shaw at Stan Deyo and Daniel Holdings, author. And I can't say enough about Daniel. He's really he's got a trilogy out there on the end times and I guess you could say dimensional portals and et cetera. And I won't go into all that, but you guys just go ahead and I can tell this is going to be an interesting conversation. So go ahead and take your time and discuss back and forth what you feel like you want to talk about.
You mean I have to talk to a rickshaw?
Only if you want to. But it'll be a pleasure. It'll be a pleasure.
It's amazing to be on the same show with Stan, because Stan is such a brilliant genius when it comes to science and the Bible and everything else. So it's great to be on with you, Stan.
Well, thanks for the compliment, but I don't think I deserve it. So
that's why we call him Big Brain Stan.
Okay, guys, let's get at it.
Richard, I had suspected that it's interesting to hear a Hebrew perspective on the Torah Codes, because, we have, they call them Bible code, and that's not actually accurate, as you know, because the code lies within the Torah. There's this argument out there, and I think we talked about it the last time you were on, Richard, that you can find skips in other books like War and Peace, but you can't find skips that are to the exact number and with the odds that you can in the Torah Code. It is absolutely supernatural. And so I suspected that you would say something like that the rabbis and your friends in Israel would think that this was phenomenal, that the Torah Codes have been opened at the end, what we would call, as believers, at the end of the age. I just think that is phenomenal.
Yeah, no, and actually, in the film, we actually did that test. One thing that I talked to Professor Rips once, and I just love him. These guys are just super people, and they all feel like family. I've known them for 7 years. And I said, what would you like to try to accomplish if we get to finally do this film? And he said, and he sighed, and he said that we could somehow prove that the myth, and he says, now people can easily say codes can be found in any text. And he said, with that one sentence, it tends to disprove all of our research and work that we're doing. I said, well, for some reason, I've never seen a Torah code or a Bible code documentary show how that works. Because everybody said, oh, well, you can find the same words in Moby Dick or in, War and Peace or any other document that has, as Professor Herlick would say, a large enough text population where you could search it in a computer. So I asked Professor Herlick to do a test for me. So we took Professor Rips's Twin Towers table, which has an incredible p-value, something like 1 in 10 million, that you'd find something with all these words clustered together as it is in his table. And so it says airplane attack, Twin Towers in it. So Professor Herlick looks that up in 2 other monkey texts. And in Professor Rips's table, it comes up in something like a total of, I have to look it up exactly, but I think it was 234 characters, the whole thing. And in the other 2 tables, one of them was 7,700 characters, and the other one was 4,300 characters. And all the words were there, but they were all scattered across the page. And they were just, it was obviously just a random find that any powerful computer could do. So what was intriguing is that Professor Ripps's table on the Twin Towers, except for one letter, ended up in chapter 20 of the Book of Numbers. And then you have to ask yourself, why would the 9/11 disaster end up in a chapter in the Book of Numbers? But it does. And then these other random monkey texts, they're just scattered everywhere. So that's what, to me, makes the Torah viable, and it's mathematically provable. It's not like we're making this stuff up. We're just showing you what has been discovered.
You know, there are other codes in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament in Hebrew, in the Book of Daniel, particularly the Book of Daniel, that tell us that there are other ways that they've embedded codes other than skip codes. And a case in point is a often quoted but misunderstood verse in Daniel where it talks about the Antichrist and how he's going to put himself above the God of gods, the desire of women, and every other god. And that's in English. And if you look at it and translate it, you'll get about that same thing yourself if you translate the Hebrew to English. But what people reading that weren't familiar with women and with the culture of Israel at the time of Daniel would know is that the women of Israel, the desire of them was to be the mother of the Messiah, Jesus. So when you read it in that context, it becomes, it encrypts itself and becomes the Antichrist will put himself against the God of gods, the Son of God, and every other god. And then it starts to make sense, doesn't it? But that's how the encryption can also be done. It's with tricks like that.
It's interesting, Stan. There's also, remember I was talking earlier about Doran Whitstone, who was one of the initial Torah code writers, found an Obama code in a very conspicuous place in the book of Ezekiel. Now, Ezekiel doesn't seem to act the same way that the Torah does when it's searched, but he did find a very interesting skip code with the word Obama, and it ends up in chapter 38 of Ezekiel. And chapter 38 is all about this upcoming war, which it looks like with Iran. So it's very, very interesting that Obama would be time-stamped in chapter 38.
Now, Rick, wouldn't you agree, after having studied with the rabbis and various scholars on this Torah code, that there are certain things that they have discovered with that they should not make public except within the senior rabbinical study groups, not to the world at large?
Well, one thing that happened originally when I first met Professor Rips and Rabbi Gladerson, they had a meeting. I had asked them about the whole story goes. I said, what does the Torah Code say about the year 2012? Now, I asked them that about 6 years before 2012 happened. I can't remember when we first met. It was 2006 or 2007, and we met in Beverly Hills. And I was just really excited to be able to meet these guys for real. And they looked at each other when I asked them that question, and they didn't know what 2012 was. It was really funny. I said, the end of the world, the Mayan calendar, all these things that people are saying is going to happen in 2012. And I figured that if it was all baloney, the Torah Code would say that. So they didn't know, so I didn't ask them any more about it. And when they left, I thought, well, that was odd, because everybody seems to know about 2012, but the rabbis and professors. Well, about 10 days later, I get this frantic phone call from Rabbi Gladerson. He goes, Richard, this was a brilliant idea. You had to look up 2012. And I'm going, how is that possible? And he said, we found a ton of tables about 2012 in the Torah Codes. I said, you did? And he hung up. About 10 minutes later, Professor Harrelip calls, you don't know what you started. And I said, what? I just asked a question. He said that what they found shocked them. So they've gone to the high rabbi in Jerusalem to get permission to work on your film. Well, this is back before I had any money to do a film. I was just talking with them.
Right.
So anyway, they had that discussion, and the high rabbi told them, yes, you can work on the film. It's fine. Just don't say that the Messiah, just don't show codes about the Messiah is going to return at a specific time. And I said, well, I have to immediately agree to that because nobody knows when that's going to happen anyway, and I wouldn't want to be the one saying he's coming this year or next, whether or not it's in the codes, because now what we know about the Torah Codes also sometimes reflect the zeitgeist of the times. So we found all these tables that say 2012, end of the world, 2012, 2012. Hashem will redeem in 2012. That was probably the coolest one. Glazerson found this whole sentence that says Hashem will redeem in 2012. It was a whole sentence. Well, actually that happened because there was a war that year and Israel came out on top. It had nothing to do with the Mayan calendar. It just happened to be that year. And what was interesting about the phrase that they found was the phrase was encoded with an ELS skip of 2,012 characters.
Oh, yeah.
So not only was it about 2012, it was 2012.
That is crazy.
Isn't that amazing?
That is, I mean, the odds of something like, I don't know what the odds are, but statistically, Stan, you're the numbers guy, that's mind-blowing that something like that would happen.
Well, you know,
that's one of my all-time favorites.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I just said it's just one of my all-time favorites.
Okay. When I was studying with the rabbis years ago, they had, one of them had a degree in physics, and but he was also a scribe that was authorized and did make the scrolls for the shul, the synagogue, and that meant that he was able to pick up the pen and ink and the little, cut parchments and write the temple version or the synagogue version of the Torah scrolls. They unroll and take around the congregation during the ceremonies on Shabbat. Well, anyway, we were talking about that, and he was explaining to me how every word had to be, like when they were copying it from the previous sources they had to reproduce the Torah, every word had to be on the line it was supposed to be. Every letter had to be where it was supposed to be in the word on that line. And the count of letters from the top left-hand corner down to the lower right-hand corner had to be a certain thing on each page, and from the top right-hand corner down to the diagonal down to the lower left-hand corner had to be a sum. And they were so picky doing this that they were following exactly what Moses told them to do, told the Levites to do, is when you reproduce this, don't make any mistakes. If you make a single mistake on a single page, tear it up and make a new page. Don't erase it. Don't do anything. Make a new page. That way they could preserve this number relationship or count relationship between the letters, the words, and even the lines. So, in addition to the skip codes, there are the Tagine crown codes. Are you aware of that, Richard?
Oh, yeah, I think you and I may have talked about that when we saw you at your home a couple years ago.
Right.
It's very interesting.
There are 7 letters out of the 25 in the alphabet. There's Gimel, Zayin, Tet, Nun, Avin, and Sadi, and Shin. Now, these 7 letters are the only letters out of the Hebrew alphabet that appear to have these little feathers on the top of them when they're written in the Torah scrolls to go into the synagogue. Now, the feathers on top of those particular letters don't always appear in the books of Moses. Some places a letter like Zayin will have the feathers, other places it won't. And the feathers are little strokes on the top of the letter, and there's either 1, 2, or 3 strokes on the top of these Tagine crowns, or these letters which are crowned with Tagine marks. Now, according to the legends within the yeshiva, in the rabbinical college, Moses told the scribes and the Levites, he said, look, reproduce these exactly as I say, but keep them in the synagogue or in the temple scrolls, but later in the synagogue scrolls. Keep them out of the public eye, because these contain an even greater message than the letters over which they reside. Now, they have not been able to figure out exactly how to use the Tagian crowns, or if they have, it has not been made public, which is fair enough. But one of the tricks that the rabbi showed me was relating to the book of Zohar, the Light, saying, when you want to look at the Torah and see a secret, don't look at it directly. It's like looking at the sunset. If you look straight into the sunset, it says, your eyes will be blinded by the light of the sunset. But if you look off to the side, indirectly, you will see fine rays of light coming over the horizon, he says. And so it is with the secrets of the Torah. So one of the ways you do that, guys, is hold a mirror up to the Torah and read it in reverse.
That is interesting.
That's wild.
Fascinating.
That is really wild.
Unfortunately, there is no Hebrew font I know of, Stan, that has those crowns above the text, and I don't know how that would interface with the current technology that we have to search the Torah.
Oh, the guys that write the software there would know how to do that, but anyway, it's something that's probably better kept into the scholarly region rather than in the the public versions that are being done anyway.
Well, there's many mysteries, and the earlier question about all of these tables that are coming out, there's been a wave of tables that have been done recently about the Messiah. And this is a very strange year. Everybody knows we've got 2 more blood moons this year and a solar eclipse. And in Joel chapter 2, it says, and the sun will be turned to darkness and the moon into blood. And that happens this year. And the rabbis and professors have found lots of tables about the Messiah for 2015 and 2016, like something significant is going to happen in the next 2 years. We don't know what that means. So but it is interesting.
Well, Richard, this is a Shemitah year, and one of those blood moons falls right on feast day. Have you all looked in the Torah Code regarding that last blood moon?
Well, Glazerson has done roughly 2,000 tables and has put them all up on YouTube on pretty much any topic. And while some of them may or may not be statistically significant, they're all really interesting. And you can go to his YouTube site and find pretty much anything. But, Glazerson is well aware of the blood moon thing, and we've talked about it many times. And we know that it's a sabbatical year. That's the whole point of all of this. And so we think it's going to be a rough year, 2015. From many different aspects. Well, all the crazy stuff that's going on with Obama and Netanyahu is a bit disturbing. It's unsettling.
Well, it's not just politically, though. We have, in fact, I was on another radio show earlier today, we have the whole issue of pending economic collapse, and Stan Hawley talks about this kind of thing all the time. But this year, there's a convergence of so many different things. I've read where we are in a cycle of war. And if you look back to just before 1926, there's so many things that are mirroring that time as well. So the very fact that we are in that Shemitah year, I think it's very significant, and I'm going to have to get to Rabbi Glazerson's page to take a look at some of that stuff, because I think you're absolutely right, Rick. I think it is going to be a very, very rough year.
Yeah, maybe the next 2 years. I don't know. I mean, the strange Hezbollah attack no one really expected that. And, of course, there's Hamas is back building rockets again, and then they got flooded out. And then we have ISIS, with all of their bloodthirstiness, and then we've got the entire government of Yemen basically stepping down, and then we have the king of Saudi Arabia passing away. I mean, it's just like everything's kind of like falling apart little by little. It's really strange. It's all happening at the same time, pretty much.
And not only that, but our own government, our own so-called president, saying that there will be consequences for Netanyahu speaking to Congress. Wait a minute, I thought he was an ally of ours. So when we start turning our back on Israel, I think it's going to be a rough year.
Well, that's why I was saying I'm disturbed by what's going on with Netanyahu, because it's dangerous.
Yeah, I don't know, guys. I don't know if y'all are aware. I know I had shared with Richard this recent report about from WorldNet Daily about some undermining of Netanyahu and Israel and by whom. But at the same time, we're also seeing, and I posted today, the fact that the Iranians have now got the Netanyahu family photo and other Israeli officials on their website with threats. And they basically are targeting or threatening to target with assassination not only Netanyahu and other officials, but also his own family, wife and sons. So, this, and Richard, as you were sharing, and I don't want to jump in here, but I'm fixing to get back out, but you're talking about, Richard, everything you mentioned is just literally within days. I mean, we're not talking, this has been happening in the last few months. We're literally talking about days, and that's what's so significant.
Yeah, within the past week and a half or so. It's breathtaking what's going on. And
there's another thing, too.
Thank you for sending me that link, Larry.
There's another thing, too, that's happening very rapidly this year. And I pointed out in the lectures that I did with the Prophecy Conference back in July last year that the name of the Antichrist is going to be revealed, and the man will be revealed before the rapture occurs. It says, has the man of sin been revealed in the New Testament, so that you don't panic until he's been revealed. Well, the book of Revelation speaks about the number 666 being the number of a man, and that man is King Solomon. In the Bible, there's only one reference to 666, or one person referred to by that. That's how much gold that he made in his various collections around the planet. Now, to that end, I said, okay, if the Antichrist is going to have the name of Solomon or Soleimani or Suleiman or Salman, then we need to watch the news for leading persons who have, strong military actions to fill that bill. And right now, there are 3 people. In the last 6 months, there was only one for about 4 months. Now there's 2 come up this year. And the first one I saw was Abu Suleiman, who was born in Australia and became Islam cleric and went over to Syria and is working his way up to number 2 in the al-Nusra front, fighting ISIS. Now, he's not as strong a military guy as another one that's popped up, and that's Qasem Soleimani, General Qasem Soleimani, who is the head of Iran's Quds force, like a master of force, which is interesting, according to what Daniel said. But anyway, and a third one has come up here in the last week, where the king of Saudi Arabia dies and is replaced by his brother, 78 years old, last name Salman, another derivative of Solomon.
Wow, that's pretty weird.
So we're keeping an eye on that, and then after he appears on the scene and is identified, I don't know whether we'll be here to see the false prophet who comes after him, but it will be a separate person that will certainly point him up to the people of the world as a great being.
Well, in addition to that, and Richard, since you were just recently in Israel, you probably could speak to this. There is serious talk. There's always serious talk, but there is very serious talk about once again starting up sacrifices, Jewish sacrifices on the Temple Mount. And I heard reports that they actually do have a red heifer that they could actually cleanse the area with. So all those things are moving forward so quickly, and it's breakneck speed. Just as one of you all said, it is stunning to see the developments just within the last couple of weeks. I mean, it just blows my mind.
Well, one of my rabbi friends told me that they already have the furniture for the interior of the tabernacle is built and standing by. Everything's
the temple
ready.
foundation.
Yeah. And there's talk about rebuilding it onto the Temple Mount, but on some kind of a raised platform is something that I've heard recently. I don't know if that's true, but
well, guys,
to fulfill the prophecy that it looks like it's floating once it's up there.
They could do that on the north side, just off of the platform that the Dome of the Rock is built on. They could build a platform with a walkway going over to the new Solomon's temple, not the temple of Herod, because that's too big. But they could build Solomon's temple in 2 or 3 locations in the North Gardens part inside the Temple Mount, and near what is called Solomon's Seat and Solomon's Gateway.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Arabs, the Turkish Muslims, in their main TV news, one of the women, I have the article, was quoted last year saying, the journalist, she was saying, okay, look, we need to let Israel worship God on the mount with us. And to that end, we should let them build the Temple of Solomon. And she was specific about the Temple of Solomon, not of Herod. And that's because the Arab Muslim nations revere King Solomon as a great prophet, equaling Muhammad or perhaps greater, and some of them even look forward to him to return in some human form as a Messiah for them. So they are happy to let the Temple of Solomon be built for the Jews on the Temple Mount. All this stuff is being openly discussed, and, just right before our eyes it's happening.
Yeah. It's true.
It's
an amazing time to be alive.
It really, really is, Richard. And I envy you. I've never been to Israel, but I just wonder how long we can run with all of these things coming to a head. It just seems to me that this is a critical year, and I'm not saying that the Messiah is going to come back this year, but I am saying that this is a year to watch. This is. I'm afraid that this is the year that the stuff really hits the proverbial fan, actually.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what was interesting for me is that I had some former military experts that were opening doors for me to get almost to where we're almost like on the border of Gaza. And we didn't want to stand on it because the week before that I was there with Dan and also with Colonel Danny Grossman, who was kind of taking us to these places. Danny was a former A-4 fighter pilot, and everybody knows him over there. And he always would bring a Tupperware box of brownies every day when he came. He'd give everybody a hot brownie. It was really funny. So you see Danny go, "Where's my brownie for the day?" Anyway, he took us to some places right on the border there where Dan Gordon told the story about the green wheat field, which is in the film, which I don't want to spoil the punchline for you until you've seen the film. You don't know what I mean. But so we walked out on that field together, and I guess what's interesting to me was how people that live in those kibbutz along the border of Gaza and Israel have to live basically always keeping one ear open to air raid sirens and always knowing where they are in relationship to the closest bomb shelter. And they've been doing that for 14 years. because there's always a rocket being lobbed over at them. And Sarah Pollock, who took us on a tour of her kibbutz, showed us where a Hamas rocket had fallen in the middle of kind of like the park area there where the kids play, and showed me the hole in the ground where it hit, and it had hit a tree and then bounced onto the ground and blew up, and it was headed for a building, and it was deflected by a tree, fortunately. And these are missiles that are basically made in people's basements in the Gaza Strip, and a lot of the missiles were built from irrigation pipe that Israel had set over there to help them with their agriculture. And that instead of using that for a constructive purpose, they cut it on a lathe and filled it full of explosives, welded some tail fins to the bottom of it, and put it in a launcher and sent it back to Israel as a bomb. Mm-hmm. And they don't have much. I have a couple pieces of those sitting downstairs on the table, Hamas rockets that I picked up in Israel, and this is like shrapnel that's flying through the air at 500 or 600 miles an hour. It can just take your leg right off. And basically she says whenever a rocket falls and you can't get to a bomb shelter, the best thing you can do is to lie as flat as you can on the ground. Because she said what happens is when it explodes and sends all of the pieces into the air, it basically explodes like a fountain in that kind of direction, shoots up high. And so if you're down, you can sometimes not get hit by it. But that's what they have to put up with all the time. So I don't know how much longer they're going to put up with it. I really don't know. At a certain point, I think they're just going to say enough is enough, and they're going to have to do something massive, because nobody can live like that. Imagine if we were in America and say that Mexico was sending rockets over into San Diego all the time. Would go, that would be it. It'd be scorched earth in Mexico if that was the case. And we would just say, well, what do you expect us to do? We're not going to let our people be killed just for doing carrying on their lives in San Diego, So I think at some point Israel and the news media is going to have to come to grips with the reality of what's actually going on over there.
That reminds me of the stories that, and Larry, I think you actually posted a few of these stories where there were rockets during that war. I guess you guys were there at that time, right? But rockets that were supernaturally deflected from Israel, and even the Arabs were surprised at that. Do you remember those stories you posted, Larry?
Oh yeah, Richard. I think he's got part of that in his trailer too.
They're in the movie. Yeah, they're actually in the movie. There's one well-known case. I think it's called Israeli Towers in Tel Aviv. It's a massive structure, and Hamas sent a very large rocket. It wasn't like a Qassam rocket, one of the little primitive ones. It could have been more or less like a Fajr 5 or something from Iran, of Iranian design, that was going to impact this tower, and they set up several Iron Dome missiles to try to intercept it, and they all missed. And so they hit the panic button, saying there's going to be a disaster. And we missed, and there's only like a couple seconds left. And suddenly this big wind picked up, which is verifiable. You can look on the Iron Dome computer system, and they recorded this, from what I've been told. Picked that missile up and pushed it back over the Mediterranean Sea from where it fell into the ocean harmlessly. And
that is absolutely, that's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and so then this terrorist said that their God prevents missiles from hitting them.
That is amazing. Well, guys, let me interrupt us here. We're right at the top of the hour, and
that went quick.
We're going to just have a little song here. Dorothy, the producer, is going to input a song to us, and while we can all take a little break or get something to drink, and we'll be back in just a few minutes and go back into what we were talking about.
In the desert, crying, prepare ye the way.
Well, we're back, and this is Larry Taylor. I'll tell you what, I am so fascinated by just some of the discussion that I'm hearing tonight. And I know I'm not saying enough in the conversation, but listen, I'm just sitting here all ears. And tonight we're interviewing Richard Shaw about Torah Code, End of Darkness film that's coming out, and we've got Stan Deyo that is just coming up with some incredible data. I mean, some really, really, my ears are itching actually hearing some of the data that he's talking about. And Daniel Holdings, really great questions and comments, and this is good, guys. This is good. I appreciate all y'all being here tonight. And Richard, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you, and thank you, Dorothy, for the wonderful music. We've got a break, and so we're ready to get back into the conversation.
Well, great. Larry, did you have any specific questions that you'd like me to touch upon? I mean, I can just take it from there. I could talk about the Torah Code tables that are in the film, things that we discovered. There's actually 41 Torah Code tables that we show in the film. Some of them are pretty interesting.
Yeah. Let me throw this comment. I had one question emailed to me before the show started, and you can either comment or Stan can comment or anybody can comment, but I'm just going to throw it out. And I'm not familiar with someone named Tony wrote about a vision of Maurice Sklar. I'm not familiar with him, but it's talk about the mark of the beast. And so I don't know if there's any codes out there recently about the mark of the beast or the mark or et cetera, but if y'all want to talk about that, that's the one question we did have.
No, I don't have codes about that particularly, but I have codes about the various wars and about one that we found that was really interesting. We didn't put it in the film because after I showed it to some of the other professors and rabbis, they weren't sure it was totally significant. But what's difficult sometimes about looking at these codes is that sometimes you'll end up with a table that has a lot of really intriguing words in it, and you don't know whether it's statistically significant or not, if it just is kind of like a random thing or if it's really something that you should put some attention into. And so this is kind of like going back to the 2012 thing that I was talking about earlier. But there was a table that Dr. Rotenberg discovered, along with Rabbi Glazerson, that said Islamic World War was the topic of the table, and it was found in 2010. Now, Glazerson sent me this table in 2010, and I'm looking at it, and I'm going, I don't know what to do with this. I don't want to accuse the Islamic fundamentalists of creating a war that hasn't occurred yet. But what was interesting, looking back now, that's kind of when everything started falling apart. It's been within the past 5 years. So now I kind of think the table is a little more significant than we all gave it credit for initially. And we have stuff like that. The other thing I was going to say about the 2012 tables, we had many that said end of the world, but in the movie, I showed Professor Rips, who in 2008 or 9 was saying, was showing me the 2012 on his computer, and it came up in a single line, and it said 2012 canceled.
That's funny.
Which we all had to kind of laugh. And he said, there it is, it's a Deuteronomy, and he gives me the chapter and verse where the word canceled came up in the plain text by the 2012 Torah Code year, all on the same line. Now, that's pretty weird.
That's interesting.
And so he was saying in the film is that this is how you can have really misunderstandings in like trying to do predictions in the code. We don't know what we're looking at here. And I talked with Kerlik about it, and I said, sometimes I think the Torah codes are reflecting more or less the zeitgeist of the times, like what people are talking about. And Harold totally agrees. It's like, yeah, everybody was saying it was the end of the world. So that's what comes up in the Torah Codes.
Richard, now I do want you to know, and I want everybody to know that I'm making a pun here. This is something I'm saying. This is not what is said, but you know what's interesting? I think about, because I knew that you was working on Torah Code 2012 originally was the film, but
right
before that, it's kind of like, it reminds me of kind of like a joke. You got these Mayans making out their long calendar, and they get to the point where maybe they found out that 2012 was canceled, and they didn't know where to go with the calendar anymore, and it just stopped,
Well, that's what Professor Haralick thought. He thought that it was all just a repeating calendar, so it just starts over. But I'm not sure. I think Gleason found a table which I thought was really intriguing. It said, instead of end of the world, it said change in the world on December 22nd, 2012. And to me, that was very interesting, because that is really what has been happening. If you think back to 2012, I mean, there's been all kinds of strange things happen the past 3 years.
Richard, that date sticks in the back of my mind. And Stan, you might know this. That date, now look, this is really crazy. The Large Hadron Collider was cranking up on that date, and it was supposed to shut down just after that date. Dan, your memory's far better than mine. Do you recall that?
I'm sorry, I don't have that date in my memory. It's. No, I can't verify that. I don't know.
Well, I do remember something. I don't remember the date either being tied with the super collider, but a lot of people were concerned that they were going to create some kind of mini black hole by using the equipment and destroy the Earth. I mean, that was kind of like.
But even if they did,
people were afraid of that.
Even if they did, the mini black holes will almost instantaneously evaporate. They have to be over a certain size before they can start to accumulate. So that's not really an issue.
That's what.
No, I wasn't saying, Stan. It wasn't my. I totally agree with you, Stan. But I know that was just something that was being said at the time.
Right.
Well,
I see what you're saying.
The reason I mention is because there has been the case made that the Large Hadron Collider is like a giant portal that can open up other portals all over the Earth. And it's interesting to me that since 2012, although the world did not end, and many of us said it wasn't going to end that year, but things have changed rapidly since 2012. So who knows? I mean, it could very well have been, changes started, as like Torah Code said. But I wanted to go back to something else that you said that was in the Torah Code back in 2010. You said an Islamic world war. And, the funny thing is, as soon as you said that, Richard, something out of today's news popped out in my mind. ISIS came down and they said that they would cut off the president's head in the White House. It was on Drudge Report today. And they are, in fact, bent on, taking over the world, and they sprung up out of nowhere. Now, Waleed Shabbat makes the case that the mark of the beast is not 666. This is not me saying this, is Waleed Shabbat, but that what John saw when he wrote that was not number. He saw Arabic writing, and he traced over the Arabic writing, and it was actually the Shahada, the Islamic Shahada. There is no God but Allah and Muhammad his messenger. And what Shabbat says is that he saw this because the Islamists will wear this bandana on their head with this, or an armband with this, and that's what John was. Now, I don't know if that's the case, But I do know this, that Islam is, and we're not bashing Islam. I don't think they need any bashing because they're proving out who they are. But the point is that it is literally bent on taking over the world, even if it means a world war. So I think that is, although we couldn't know that in 2010, I think that's very significant that was in the Torah Code way back then.
It is kind of interesting, and it does seem like that ISIS is trying to create some caliphate where they want to have Sharia law like all over the whole world, which would set everybody back centuries. It's a weird thing, and something that as I was a kid growing up and listening to Bible prophecy in church when I was a little kid, I could never imagine something like this. This is weirder than anything I could have come up with. But I can sure see how the whole mark thing could easily happen. Imagine, say the dollar does plummet. All of these other world governments that are working with the dollar have problems because of it. And so everybody's in a major world depression. They would have to come up with some kind of other money system to counteract all of that. And one of the theories that I heard recently, which seems to make sense to me, that the IMF would have to issue some kind of new currency that is global. So if they did that, then it's not much of a stretch to think, look, we've had so much trouble with hacking into people's bank accounts and fraud and internet fraud and banking fraud and credit card hacking and all of these things that are happening. We're going to issue you this little chip that's key to your DNA. It's your DNA. No one else can steal that from you because it's you. And that all you have to do now when you walk into the grocery store is just wave your hand over the scanner, and we'll know who you are, and no one else can ever hack into your bank account again. And people are already wearing devices that's electronic. I mean, you had Google Glass come out, and everybody wanted one, and now there's the Apple Watch is coming out that's going to really be cool. And people like this idea of having kind of Android technology to enhance their, personal lives. I don't think this is a big stretch at all. I could see how this would really easily be adapted, and people would think it's a good thing. But once you do that, you've become a slave.
Well, Yeshua said that unless he came back, I'm paraphrasing, that there wouldn't be any mankind to come back for. Unless he cut that time short, that we would kill ourselves off. And, Richard, along with that lust for technology, we see, and, Tom Horn is good for following this kind of thing, we see the limits of science being pushed left and right. Not only are people talking about wearing embedded technology for the sake of banking and other things. And I read about a month ago, somebody actually did that, put a chip in both of his palms so that he could work his house and get to his accounts and all that other stuff. So you're right, it is actually being done. But in addition to that, I read this, it was a terrible article today about how they are using aborted fetuses' kidneys to be grown in rats for people, as well as their stem cells. We are pushing technology in ways that our forefathers and our fathers would never want to do that. And the end of this cannot be good. It just can't.
Well, the weird part about all of this is that it weirdly goes back to the Book of Enoch, where it's talking about the Nephilim, and that, according to the Book of Enoch, they were doing the same thing in those days. They were playing with the design of plants and animals, and we think that they had some kind of grid system in the world that they were using to retain power. And this is something that L.A. and I kind of have popped into our heads when we were in Peru a couple of years ago. We were looking at all these structures that we'd just seen, and all of a sudden it became clear to us that this was a worldwide grid of oppression. And now it's kind of back again. And I told L.A. the other day in the work that we're doing together, I said, it's very strange when Yeshua mentions, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be. And most church folks think the days of Noah was, oh, well, that was because people were sinning and were really evil. They don't really take the whole tapestry of what was going on during the days of Noah into account. And that's one of the things that I think Stan and I were talking about before the show came on tonight. There's this guy in the Torah Codes film who's a friend of mine. His name is Nir Studnitsky, and he called me when he said, Rick, I'm doing this study in ancient Hebrew, and I'm going, Nir, what in the world possessed you to want to do that? That's like one really hard study. And he goes, it's just so interesting. And I thought, okay, cool. Well, I want to hear more about it. So some time went by, and he wrote a book, and we would meet at lunch and stuff with our other friend Bill Goldstein, who's a really great composer, and would sit there at Mel's Diner and watch the Lamborghinis drive by. And Nir would talk about, the original Torah. We knew it didn't have any spaces between the texts, but he said what it also didn't have were punctuation marks. And he said, and when you take those out, things mean, it has a different meaning. And so he showed me this passage in Deuteronomy where it said, and there were large fortified cities in the sky. And that's when you go to the original Hebrew and you take the commas out from between the letters, and they so further interpreters of the Torah which was trying to understand it in later years put a comma there, and they thought that they meant, oh, these cities were like walls going up into the sky. But if you go back to the original Hebrew, it just says there were large fortress cities in the sky, and there were giants there that were superior, it says, in the ancient Hebrew. So all of a sudden now we're talking about, well, are they talking spaceships? Are they talking something else? We don't know, but we both kind of feel that it's not a huge leap of faith to think that there could have been these beings that had that technology in those early days, thousands of years ago, that were openly visiting the planet and doing all of those things, and God wiped them out with the flood, along with any of the humans that were evil too at the same time. He had to get rid of all of them. And then in Dr. Rotenberg's Torah Code table, he went into a passage in Genesis where it talks about the flood and said that the waters were boiling. Now, that's something that most people don't ever think about, was the temperature of the water at that time. It was a big cleansing deal that went on in those days. And the Torah Codes come up with this boiling water code during Noah's flood, which is pretty interesting. And you can see how that could be possible if the fountains of the deep were broken up, and if you had underground heat from the Earth's core heating the water. It was a major cleansing of the Earth at that time, and I think that's what we're going to have a cleansing again to get rid of all of this crap that we put all over the Earth, the GMO foods and all of the pollution and the radiation and everything else, and next time it's going to be with fire, according to Scripture.
Right, and then the Word talks about a new heaven and a new earth, which leads you to believe that the old one is gone. But it says that it passes away. Larry, when you talk about cities in the sky and stuff, you and I have talked a lot about in the past how movies are just kind of seeding different thoughts. So So you hear something like that, and you go, "Oh, wait a minute, that's what Jack and the Beanstalk was all about." So, I don't think that's coincidence. I think there very well was something to that. What do you think?
Well, I was thinking. I remember one time Stan was talking about a concept of anti-gravity, where you could actually Stan, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were talking about anti-gravity of something huge. You could put it up there, and it might look like one massive object, but there was a certain way you did it with anti-gravity that, it makes me think cities in the sky. It could have been a sky platform. I do know that there's some old Indian legends, because my wife studies some of those things, about something called sky people, and they're not calling them star people. They're calling them sky people, like people that live in the sky up high. And so, I don't know, but that is strange. I was going to ask you, Stan, another thing, too. Let me ask you a question here. I know you've got that stele, I think that's how you pronounce it, on the Tower of Babel. There's a book recently came out by a young girl that had done some art, and she had included in one of the art, I was looking for it here in the book. I've got it. It says that there's some data came out talking about the Tower of Babel. Oh, here it is. This gal says she had drawn some art with a Tower of Babel that looked like some spears on top, and said a puzzling thing happened about 1 year, and I'm reading out of her book. After I painted this painting, I received the news from scholars and archaeologists that their excavations showed the Tower of Babel being called a tower of spears on top. And I didn't know if you'd ever heard of that. Or if it was
no, I haven't, Larry. That's news to me.
Because I know you studied the stele, or you worked with that and found that it was more than just bricks. It was on top. There was, you had talked about what you had found on top or believed to be there, and how beings could enter our dimension, possibly through that as a portal.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't know about the spears. I don't know what function they would have, but then again, what technology would they have been using? We do know that Moses, when he was in the presence of God up on Sinai, that after a few days being there with him, Moses' tissues in his body started to glow with light because he was absorbing energy from the Lord's presence, which was probably some kind of a portal between where God lives in his universe and gated into ours. But that high energy light coming from Moses' body persisted for several weeks because he had to hide his face and his hands from people, or they were afraid of him, until it until it backed off and came back to normal energy. So the Tower of Babel, the legends say that the gods came through there at the top, waited for a while, sojourned, and had food and refreshments that were left there by the people until the energy of their bodies came down a bit, and they go to the next level, and the same thing, wait for a while, and then the next level they could finally come on down and walk amongst the people and touch them without electrocuting or burning them or something from their energy. I mean, even God told Moses, look, you can't see me because just to stand in my presence would destroy your body, just surely from my energy. Anyway, that's my take on it. I think it was a portal of some sort.
Well, Stan, I should probably tell you, I don't know if I told you this, I think I had a conversation with you in the course of writing my last book, Between the Veil. The prologue of that book mentions that very same thing, and I just want to thank you, and I actually give you credit in the book, in the acknowledgments, that idea of aliens and portals or supernatural beings and portals on the Tower of Babel came from you, and I don't know that you actually knew that I use that in my third book there, but
no,
thanks, buddy, because I think that's good stuff. I mean, if people don't understand, that tower was not just a tower. It wasn't just something to look at. It had a function, and much of your work actually brings that out, and I appreciate that so much.
Well, thank you for that. It certainly I was just following the logic of the Bible there when it was saying that the the Elohim said, let us go down, and destroy their towers so they can't ascend and become as one of us. And so it's not just climb to the top of the mountain and you get turned into a god. It's going into the area, the dimension, the parallel universe where they live. And that's what they were afraid of, was that mankind under Nimrod would poke into areas that they didn't want them. They would get out of the cage, in essence.
I could add a little bit to that. Early on, when I first met Rabbi Glazerson, I was very curious to ask him what he thought about UFOs, since that's an area of study that Eli Marzulli and I are quite into for all of these reasons. And he comes out with it on his own, talking about the tower that you guys are just discussing, and he said, so the Tower of Babel was, they set it up as a launching platform. I said, what? I mean, he comes up with this whole UFO thing, and he said, yeah, they were sending satellites into space from the Tower of Babel. I mean, this was like, he totally believed that there was UFO activity in those days, and that the tower had something to do with it, and that if it kept on, they could possibly open up a portal from that tower, and it'd be the end of the human race, pretty much. And what's weird is that a couple of years ago, there was some video shot of something that looked like a portal hanging over Mexico that Jaime Massaz, one of his guys, shot. And I put it in one of the watchers. I think it's in Watchers 5, if I remember right. But it looked like a hula hoop, except it was thicker, and it was kind of cocked at an angle, and it was all multiple colors of the rainbow. And it was just sitting in the night sky, just doing that. I mean, it looks like something from a movie, but it was just filmed on a cheap video camera. And these things are like appearing in the sky now. It's like, what is that, and why is it there? And if we flew it into it, what would happen to us? We don't know.
Well, what is Satan? I mean, his domain now is the principalities of the air. So up in there somewhere is his gateway to wherever he dwells.
Yeah, and then there's the whole idea that we're all living in what Chuck Missler says, we're living in a digital simulation, and none of this is really real.
Well, to support that, though, the Bible does say that after the millennium, that the earth and the heavens shall pass away, and a new earth and heavens will replace it. And if you think about it, because God's energy on his cells is so much greater than anything on earth, any atom, that when we do get to the point of being absorbed into his kingdom or to one of the levels, universes between him and us, this will all disappear in a great fire heat. The whole universe that we know will just close down, and a new one will replace it. And that does agree with what Chuck was saying about this being a virtual reality, in that it's only temporary and it's not where real life occurs.
I tend to believe it because one of the other areas of study that I'm really interested in is the near-death experience, and people that have had those almost 90% of the time say that life was so much more real after they were dead than it is when they were living. I mean, their senses were better. They could see in 360 degrees. The nerve endings on the bottom of the soles of their feet were as sensitive as on their fingertips. They could hear things they couldn't hear. They could see colors that they'd never seen before, and all of that was during their death experience. And so coming back to quote-unquote life again was almost kind of a downer. It was like, well, it's really not nearly as cool.
Well, for me, I didn't get all the way out there to the light. I was pulled back into my body before I could get out there, but I did notice that when you leave the body, your mind expands. The capabilities, like to be able to watch, say, 60 to 100 TV screens running with events in your life simultaneously, and also to want to know things about, okay, how does the universe work? How does flying saucers work? All those things would be just kind of child's play out there. But when you came back in the body, it was like trying to fit a foot into a shoe that's too tiny and parts of it fall off on the floor trying to get back into the body. And it took years for that to gradually come back.
This is like I talked to Dr. Jeffrey Long, who's a friend of mine, who's a near-death expert, and he has over 3,000 documented cases that he's compiled over the years. And he said, one of the guys said, yes, you seem to have all of this eternal knowledge when you're in that state, just like what you're saying, Stan. But he said when he got back, he couldn't remember all of it. And he said it's like trying to put an ocean of knowledge in the thimble that's my brain.
That's a good analogy. But you know what, fortunately, as I said, over the years that have passed in dream states, I've remembered parts of it, not all of it. But so some of it must have stuck around the edges. I'm not sure how it got back. But
well, you know, that'd be a tough gig. In order to get a big brain like Stan Deyo, I have to die. That's a tough way to get it. You know, it occurs to me that state, that what we once were in the Garden of Eden, before sin, before corruption, that's how we're supposed to be. And you know, I always talk to people about this kind of thing. And, you know, people listen on the radio, and we're talking about all kinds of crazy stuff, and, you know, talking about what things are coming upon the earth, and they can get worried about anything that we've talked about. But the fact is that we were never created to be like we are now. This is a byproduct of sin, this body, this space we live in, this 3D universe, 4D, if you believe Einstein, that said time was the fourth dimension. But the fact is that Yeshua, when he was, you know, just before he ascended back to the Father, he was able to break our physical law, walk through walls and all kinds of other stuff. So it occurs to me that what comes after this is indeed better than what we have now. Although, don't get me wrong, I don't want to rush things. You know, I have a family. I want to see my daughter grow up and all this other kind of thing. But the point is, when we really stop to think about who we are in Christ, we need not fear, because we know what comes after. I mean, we really know. It is better than it is here. And for your friends that have had near-death experiences, or those interviews that you read, or for you, Stan, there is something much larger, much better than there is here. So, you know, we just need to make the most of the time, you know, that we have left here. However long.
Absolutely. I didn't want to come back. I got to be honest. I was happy to stay out there. It was so peaceful and just a huge experience, but had to come back.
Yeah, what caused you to get that close to death? What happened?
Oh, I contracted some kind of a bacterial infection. Might have been in the pool in the apartments I was living in Dallas, but they used me at the hospital there as a experimental case with acromycin 4, and they injected me and stuff, and had me go back to my apartment, just around the corner, and see how I would go with some pills they gave me for the antibiotic, and that was, about midnight, 1 o'clock when I got home, and I hurt everywhere, and tried to just lay on my bed and lay in a position that wouldn't hurt so much, and that's making the story short. I did bounce out of my body, and after seeing tunnel vision, close down the light, and after sound around the apartments turned down, and the only reason I came back was because my mom was calling me on the phone by the bed, and ringing, and it was on the right side of my body, on the ear, obviously, and that's where the lasso caught me out there and pulled me back in, and I tried to get her off the phone and tell her I was just fine and hanging on to that other world out there. It's like a ledge, and I dropped off the ledge and couldn't get back.
I was like, Mom, I'm busy right now.
Well, Stan, I dare say that was the Lord, because I for one am sure glad that you're still around, because I've learned a lot from you. Thanks to your mom for that. Really.
Well, you know what? I did ask my mom later about that, and she never called me. So, it was the Lord, I'm sure.
Wow. Now that's wild. Larry, you had several experiences like that, and you didn't have to die to get them, did you?
No, it's very interestingly, it's something that I attribute to really the director of the Holy Spirit, and something the Lord allowed me or designed for me to do. It was just simply leave my body and go to different places sometimes. There's a list, and I don't talk about it much. I didn't have to die to go, but then I was so concerned, though, when this began, really, because, I was concerned that I was being deceived by something else. And, more than being the Holy Spirit or directing or initiating this, I was concerned that it was a deception of some sort. And so I prayed and prayed and prayed about that, and here's what happened. I had another trip, so to speak, in my spirit. And the Lord allowed me to wake up, getting back into my body, and let me tell you, that is really an experience. Absolutely amazing. Oh, my. One day we'll talk about it, but I don't talk about it much because a lot of people just don't believe that stuff. But, the stuff we don't understand, it's real. I mean, it's really real, and we are more aware, much more acutely aware of the surroundings out of this natural body, than really we are when we're in this natural body. Our hearing and every sense is dulled by this body that we have in the natural. But we got to use it here, I guess.
Sometimes, Larry, I try to think about my body as a robot's body, and we're inside of it, or we're in a computer somewhere directing it to move and do things, and we might not even look like the robot. I'm just, it's a car that we move around in this environment with.
That's very good.
I've heard that people that have communicated with aliens call our bodies containers.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? That's true. I've heard that too. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
And, one thing that kind of intrigues me, and here's something what I'm trying to get people to understand with our film and everything else that we're doing, like with Watchers, which is a separate project from this. Torah Codes is something that's been one of my pet projects for years, but it's basically to show that I just want people to not just look at the Bible as a book of religion. You got to do this, you got to do that. It's a historical manuscript that has an abundance of very strange clues in it. And if we could just look at it as that, there's things that are scientific in the scriptures. There's stuff that historically we can go back in and try to rediscover. And people are doing those things now. And the Torah Codes is a great example of how technology can be used to unearth Scripture. And then once you do that, you start having questions about other things. Like we talk about the ephod in the film and how the high priest could ask it questions, and the stones in it would light up, and the words that were under each stone, they could use those letters to formulate sentences and get answers to their question. So one night, L.A. and I were taking Rabbi Glazerson to dinner, and L.A. said, "Have you ever looked up the ephod and the Torah Codes?" And Glazerson's eyes lit up and twinkled. So he did that evening and showed it to me, and his keyword set was Torah Codes, and then 5 times on a line intersecting, it said ephod, 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 the ephod, ephod, ephod. And we're going, that's interesting. And so we think that maybe the Torah Codes could be the modern ephod, because you can ask it questions and it gives you answers. And there was something very mysterious about the ephod. So I think it was partially a technical device.
Well, remember how the ephod looked? It was like a matrix of jewels in a rectangular form, just like your.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, and I was talking with Professor Herlick the other day, and he said, I'm doing this research using crystals and neodymium magnets and copper wire. I said, what are you trying to accomplish? He said, somehow to be able to project my thoughts into this device. I said, okay. Now listen, it may sound really crazy, but we're talking about a guy like Stan that used to work at JPL.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, Robert, could we, if this is working, and he did an experiment and it actually did something. I'm not going to release everything that it's doing yet because this is his discovery, but I said, could it be, and I immediately thought of the ephod when he told me about this. I said, could it be that the ephod stones that we read about in Scripture are describing the stones like an amethyst or whatever, a ruby or whatever they were? I don't remember all the different stones used. But could those have been more descriptive of the colors, and could those stones have been crystals of those colors?
Guys, you
function that
are
way?
blowing my mind. I mean, you're blowing my mind. Larry, now, you neither Rick nor Stan have probably read my first book, but Larry, you read my first book, and you know that the ephod is in that first book. And you know that the scientist Bryce Cooper uses the ephod as that is really with crystals. I said that the Urim and the Thummim were crystals. But the ephod is actually a communication device to bridge, he says in the book, to bridge the divide of dimension. That's what he said. So, you know, and in that first book, Rick, I think I've told you this, that it was found in the Torah Code. Larry had it searched out in the Torah Code. It was found in the Torah Code. So just this discussion and knowing what I know about the ephod and the research I did on it, as well as the Urim and the Thummim, you could very well be right. I mean, I think that's probably exactly what it was.
Well, it's interesting because the Scriptures kind of give us these clues that says, and everything was built with great cunning. Now, we don't know what that means. They were given instructions to do inner workings of these devices. So the Ark of the Covenant was built with great cunning, and the ephod was built with great cunning. Maybe those stones in the ephod were thought-controlled, like what Professor Herlick is trying to design. I don't know. I mean, but it's like, if we can have something that we can say, look, these guys are describing a scientific process that they were given, and they didn't have the technology today. They don't like I always say, use this example. If you were living 3,000 years ago and you're a Bible prophet, and someone showed you a glowing red LED, what would you call that? Well, it burns like fire, and it was the color of a ruby. That's what you'd say. And it's just a friggin' LED.
Well,
so we have to start looking at this stuff.
In case the audience is sitting there going, okay, these guys have lost it. I just read an article yesterday or the day before, at least the heading of an article, that said that they have actually developed a teleportation device for things, like a Star Trek thing, right? That they can actually move material from point A to point B. Now, you know, that's technology. That's man's technology in the 21st century. And if they had technology back then, and I suspect they did, you know, Stan, you'd be better able to speak to that, that they would say things like that. Well, it glowed like fire, or whatever the case may be. But there's a simple technological explanation, but they didn't have that language back then.
Well, what about
that's
Stephen?
Right. Just like
Stephen was translated from one town to another to talk to witness to the eunuch out there.
That's right.
That's teleporting.
That's right.
That's exactly right.
And the angel that came and freed the guys in prison walked right through the wall, and all their chains fell off. I mean, that's just like an abduction
and
scenario
Jesus walked
that
through
we
the
see
door.
nowadays. Right. And then in Ezekiel, where it talks about this wheel within a wheel, he describes it as being the color of a beryl stone. So I looked that up the other day, and what color is that? It's silver gray. That's the color of most ships that you see, UFOs, silver gray.
Yeah, well, beryl can also be emerald or reddish, red or green. Well,
it's not like it can be. I think it's Yes, there's several different colors, but the one that seemed to pop out on the internet was the silver gray color, and to me that's like, okay, he's describing a ship of some sort. But yeah, I agree, Stan.
Sure.
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting too, guys. I was thinking about it. You know, if people think we're a little weird right now, you know, the old legends of and descriptions and talk of the old legends surrounding Atlantis, how they continually have talked about or brought up crystals, you know, some type of technology with crystals or energy force, you know, that we didn't have or that we don't have today that was probably pre-flood, I would assume.
Well, yeah, that was from Edgar Casey's readings, wasn't it?
I think so, but it seems like there's some legends out there too. Maybe it's well, it could be in the old Indian or Sanskrit or whatever they called it. Seemed like there was data on that.
Well, Stan, didn't they say that the top of the Great Pyramid was a crystal at one time?
According to Herodotus, there used to be a crystal there, and Khufu, the Great Pyramid, was known as the Pyramid of Light, you know, or Egypt was known as the Land of the Light, and there was a moat of water encircling the Great Pyramid at the same time, and the surface of the Great Pyramid was coated with it's a white stone. It was very smooth. The dad actually had a piece of it he brought home when he was over there in the war. Not gypsum, but anyway,
alabaster.
Alabaster, yeah, and they coated it with alabaster. It's all smooth, and you have that magical like pyramid, the mini pyramid up on the top, which was either gold or crystal, and we're not sure what the deal was, but. So in the time of Herodotus, the legend still persisted, and he wrote it down. And there are things underneath that whole plateau area between the Great Pyramid and the other two. There are cement tunnels and waterways and everything way under the sand that you can walk in and swim in some of them.
Wow.
Incredible.
So much we
more
don't
and more
know.
People seem to, so many people now seem to believe that the pyramids were some kind of industrial device generating power to power this whole grid system that they had at the time. Seems to make a lot of sense at this point.
Well, if it did, or if it just powered its area, who knows? I mean, but it glowed, you know, to make light around it, so that impressed the natives.
Well, I
think I'd be impressed.
I bet you didn't have to wait on hold forever with them like you do Edison anyway.
Hey, guys, you know what? Talking about technology and the Bible being historical, and if we use it, we can find out a lot of stuff. I've said this here several times about discovering the Garden of Eden. I didn't really start out to do that. I was looking at other things for my lecture, and one of the things was on the flood and the expanding Earth hypothesis or theory that the Earth is now 25%, a third bigger than it was. You'd have to reduce it 25% to get to where it was before it expanded and split the continents apart in the time of Peleg. Peleg's time was around 2200 BC. And if you accept the fact, or accept the premise I put forward that I have found the real Garden of Eden in the high plains in amidst about 7 volcanoes in northern Tanzania, and the rivers all cut grooves in the earth there, and some of them caused Madagascar and India. When the asteroid hit the other side of the planet, it split the continents. If you accept that that's true and that the continents were all together before the split, in the time of Peleg, it means that we have to revise the mainstream archaeological dating method, which uses radioactive decay, to say that no, the continents didn't split apart 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. It was 100 million years ago before Pangea started to split apart. How do you know that? Well, we use radiocarbon-14 dating on argon gas or on carbon 14 and various other things. But what they will have to review this and say, wait a minute, what causes radioactive molecules to decay and emit light at the speed of light, in various frequencies? The thing is that modern measurements are showing that from the Big Bang till now, that the speed of light has diminished maybe 10,000 times or more. So if in the beginning of things the speed of light was 10,000 times faster, it would mean that we're a lot younger because the half-life that used to take 10,000 years takes a year. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's forcing traditional science and physics to really reevaluate, because we've got an expanding Earth. We've had a catastrophic impact that caused the flood, and 100 years, 200 years after that, the continent split apart rapidly, forming the Himalaya mountains and this and that. And I even found, before everything split apart, where Noah made his title decree to his sons and to their descendants, that there was one of them named Joktan, Joktan in English, but in Hebrew it's Yakitan, and his place touched on the edge of the Yucatan Peninsula.
That same word, Stan, came up in the Torah Codes tables for the year 2012.
Really?
Yeah, Joktan.
I'll be darned. Well, there's a lot of things yet to be discovered. It's not all done.
Wow. I'll tell you what, guys, this has been, we've only got about 3 minutes. Stan, if you would, give people where to reach you, your website, and any data you want to share with them.
Well, look, you've got my website up there, as you have for the rest of us. I appreciate that, but I'll spell it out for you. It's StanDeyo, StanDeyo.com. And the Contact Me button down at the bottom tells you our email. It's StanDeyo@StanDeyo.com. And, I'll try to answer what questions I can. Richard, what's your connections? What are your websites?
My website's up there with the intodarkness.com and pinlight.com.
Daniel, go ahead and give your address or contact information. And when are you going to write a new book?
Everybody wants to know what's happening with Larry Taylor. That's why. It's simply DanielHoldings.com, and there's all kinds of stuff on there. You can get my books there, as well as other news links and that kind of thing.
Wow, I tell you.
And now we gotta have the Larry Taylor blog address.
LarryWTaylor.org. That's just as simple as I can get it, and still remember it. But listen, I really, it's hard to end a show like this. I mean, this has been fantabulous, if there is such a word. I thank you, Richard, so much. I thank you, Stan. Daniel Holdings, God bless you. Listen, guys, we're going to have to do this again sometime, and I appreciate you guys coming on.
Thank you for the invite, and enjoyed talking to all of you this evening.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
It's fun.
And
it's
Dorothy,
fun to get to kind of stretch all these ideas out sometimes.
Okay, that's fine. By the way, Richard, L.A. Marzulli, he is also distributing your DVD, isn't he?
He is, yeah. And we'll also have other outlets for it, but right now he's doing it. You can see it on lamarzulli.net.
Okay, I'm glad you gave that out.
There's a link on Into Darkness that goes straight there, so you can get there easily any way you go.
Stan, you got any parting words for us tonight? Any blast of news we need about Earth changes?
Just keep an eye on the sun. It's acting up at the moment, shooting off flares and CMEs over the last week. I feel that we're going to see some interesting changes in the sun that we've not seen in human history soon.
Well, I tell you what, I know that NOAA and NASA and they say the Air Force and others are really, really watching closely the activity on the sun. And there's a lot of warnings. Matter of fact, a lot of warnings, Stan, I've been hearing for this year, 2015. We've got to be watchful and we've got to be ready because we don't know really everything that's coming on us.
No, and I think the sun will be one major driver that affects everyone on the planet.
Well, listen, guys, this has been good. It's went way too fast. This has been a very interesting show, and I again want to thank every single one of you, Richard and Stan and Daniel. God bless you guys, and Dorothy, thank you for the wonderful job you did in the production. And this will be up. Anybody wants to hit this link, and the show will be up recorded later, so anybody can come to it and listen to. Boy, we did talk some stuff. Listen, God bless you guys so
God
much.
bless you.
Appreciate you, and talk to you later. And shalom, my friends.
Shalom.
Shalom.